I'm Coach Gene Clemens. I am joined by Emory Hunt, football game plan, the czar of the playbook. Emory, I know you're busy, man. Thank you for joining me.
Now, always a pleasure, man. We talking shop. There's always room to talk ball.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't even want to hold you. I want to get right into it. It was a great week of football from the FCS level. Last week, we saw Eastern Washington pull off the victory over Montana. We have a fantastic slate of games coming this week. And it got me to thinking, last week I released um my first mock bracket, my first bracketology, FCS bracketology, where I predicted all of the invitees into the tournament. But knowing what we know now, a week later, I just want to get your idea. Who do you believe that are going to be the top four guys, the teams that get those buys once we get to the end of the season? We'll start with four, and then we'll work our way down from there. So who's your number 14?
It's been pretty consistent for me, to be honest, throughout the course of this season. So right now at number four, to be honest, my top four hasn't changed from week one to where we are now entering week 6. So at number four, North Dakota State. I love the run game. I love the dominance at the point of attack, all the staples that North Dakota State brings. I want to see them grow a little bit more in the passing game. Quincy Patterson, the guy they got, the transfer coming in, he's been outstanding in the run game. And this is sort of the Trey Lance approach. Maybe we see him continue to progress in the passing game moving forward, and they start to open up a little bit once they get in the playoffs, because they would have to, because right now they don't have to. Teams can't stop him in the running game. And wait till you start breaking in, Kristen Watson again this year out there on the perimeter. So I'm going to say North Dakota State right now at number 4. Love what the Bison are doing on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. My number 4 is North Dakota State. And I think that for me, when I project out, if I'm projecting out to the top 4, I think you're going to get 3 conference winners. And then the fourth team is going to be a team that doubles up from one of those conferences. I think it's either going to be from the Big Sky or from the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And I think North Dakota State, when it's all said and done, will end up being the number 2 team out of that conference. So they'll get the 4 seed and get that bye. But I do think North Dakota State is the number 4 team in the nation right now. Love the way they run the ball. I'm with you. I want to see them. I don't just want to see them pass it. I want to see them push the ball vertically. And I think that's the biggest issue I have. And when I was watching that North Dakota game, it just seemed as if they never stretched North Dakota out. They never made them defend all 3 levels of the field. And I think once they get to a point where they're making them defend all 3 levels of the field, you're going to have to watch out. As you know, they were my preseason number 1 coming into this season. But what I've seen from other teams, I've got to slot them where I think they are right now, which is number 4.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. Again, it's hard to go against the Bison. They're tried and true. They're the brand of the FCS. But right now, because of some question marks, and that's not necessarily a negative thing about their passing game, that's why I'm at number 4. But number 3 is a team that just, at the end of the day, they're just as dominant as number 4 and as number 2 and 1. But number 3 right now for me is James Madison. I just love the way they play offense. They're aggressive within their front 7 on defense, so they get after the quarterback. They make a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage, and they just fall victim to 2 teams I feel as though that are above them haven't lost yet. So, I mean, it's hard to move, to me, James Madison up any higher than 3, but they are knocking at the door. Like, they have all kind of cracks on the window. They're all kind of wood chips coming off the door, because they're just right there waiting for one slip up, then they're just going to bust through, because this is an explosive offense and a dominating defense.
So my thing about James Madison is I agree. I think that they're a top level team. Even in the spring, I don't get championship vibes when I look at this team play. I don't particularly like their quarterback play. I think it's inconsistent. I don't know if it's big game. Yes, they check a lot of boxes, but their competition, in my opinion, isn't to the level of the competition that we're seeing out west right now. I think it's interesting. I don't believe that that Villanova is as good as people think they are. I don't believe that Delaware is as good as people think they are. How good is Rhode Island? How good is New Hampshire? Uh, I mean, those teams that would normally get you battle tested, I'm not sure. Now, do I think they may end up being a number 3 seed just out of attrition? It could definitely happen. But if you're asking me right now, I think I'm going with Sam Houston. I think the Bearcats, will end up as a 3 seed because I think they'll get some knocks from the voters because they haven't looked as impressive, but they've been dealing with a lot of injuries. And these are injuries that I predicted when you have a spring season and you're the team that goes all the way to the end. We saw it with the Lakers in the NBA. It was just hard for them to make that flip and keep everybody healthy. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to go through. If they're able to go through unfazed, I'll say this. I don't believe Sam Houston's a top 10 team without Eric Schmidt. I think that he makes that much difference. And so if he's going to be out for a prolonged period of time, I could definitely see them losing one of these games. But until they do, I have to give them their respect, have them at number 3. Who's your number 2, Em?
Number 2, I have South Dakota State. Oladokin has been a godsend for this team. Even though they lost Isaiah Davis, we know about him. They still have Pierre Strong Jr. Defensively, they do a good job of just playing good team defense. Like, you'll see 11 hats to the football. You see them turn the ball over. Oladokin is putting himself in the conversation for the Walter Payton Award. And that's a guy that has played phenomenal ball at the position. Their game against Colorado State in week 0 or week 1 was dominant. I mean, they look like the Mountain West team, and that has just carried throughout the rest of the way. They haven't had a scare or any slip-ups. I like South Dakota State at number 2.
And I think that's a great pick. South Dakota State obviously doing their job. For me, though, if I'm going with a number 2 team right now, I'm going with Eastern Washington. What they've done in what I believe right now is the strongest division the strongest conference in the FBS this year may not shake out that way, but right now it's looking that way. I'm very impressed with what Eastern Washington's been able to do. I think they have the most battle-tested quarterback to go through the playoffs and go through a really tough regular season. I think if they come through this regular season unscathed, it's going to be hard for them not to get a top 2 slot. And that's what I'm going with Eastern Washington.
Fair enough. And, it's interesting when you look at Eastern Washington. I worry about their defense. I want those guys to get those consistent stops. And that offense, it looks great. It's dominant, but defensively, they have to be a little bit more of what we saw against Montana. Now, was it because Montana's offense isn't as dynamic, or did the defense show some improvement against the Grizzlies? Because that's going to be the biggest concern for me for Eastern Washington moving forward.
Absolutely. It's definitely going to be a concern. I just don't know if a team's going to be able to outscore Eastern Washington. And that was my thought process and why I thought they'd be a dark horse in the spring. I think that's even more solidified for me now. Like, it's going to be hard to beat Eastern Washington in a shootout. And so from there, who's your number 1 team, Em?
Well, until they lose, I have to keep Sam Houston at number 1. And you brought up a good point with Eric Schmidt possibly not playing in a next couple of games, because we saw Keegan Schumacher when he was up at Lafayette, and he was inconsistent. There were some games we were like, wow, he looks like a legitimate player. Then there's other games like, wow, they need to get someone else in there. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does in this offense, handed the keys to an explosive element to their ball club. Their defense has been great all season long, but they're going to need Schumacher to not be Eric Schmidt, but to be the best version of Keegan Schumacher he can be. Because if he can't, like you said, they could lose some games. And if they lose, to me, that pushes JMU probably over South Dakota State.
Yeah, and I think for me, my number 1, South Dakota State. I think when you were number 2 last year, and many people could argue that if your quarterback doesn't get hurt right at the beginning of the game, that you have a chance of beating Sam Houston. And even without him, with a quarterback who should never take another snap at quarterback at South Dakota State again, at least not in a meaningful game, you were still able to make it a really good game. I think that South Dakota State has to be my number one right now. I love what Sam does, and I'm usually not somebody that goes off of the champion until the champion loses, but I have to pay respect to the Jacks because they came back guns blazing. They may have upgraded as a passer at quarterback, which is probably a lot of people in that area may not want to hear. But they're a different dynamic with Chris Oladakan at quarterback than they were before because Gronowski was a guy who you really had to worry about killing you as a rusher, especially as a short yardage rusher. But now with a guy like Oladakan, you've got to defend all three levels. And when you have to defend all three levels, that's a recipe for success and something that you can't get by. Even with one of those running backs down, I still believe that South Dakota State has all of the necessary weapons. Remember, they're not only a top 5 offense, but they're a top 5 defense as well. No other team in FCS can say that. No other team can lay claim to that. And if you're going through the gauntlet that they're going to have to go through in order to get to the playoffs, if they come through unscathed, I cannot fathom how people are going to look at JMU's schedule versus their schedule and say we're going to put them over South Dakota State.
Yeah, good luck trying to get the Yankee, brothers off the field too. Like those dudes just find open grass consistently. They miss the third down, miss the second down, and they're big playmakers as well. And listen, this may be the best South Dakota State most complete team I've seen from them in quite some time. Because usually, even when you go back to when they had Taryn Christian, who was a tremendous quarterback in his own right, it was one element of the game that was maybe their defense isn't as good, or maybe their offense isn't just quite dynamic. They have to just play a perfect game. But this team, they look like they did in the spring. And going one back down, the next back stepped up. He was just as good as Isaiah Davis was to go along with Pierre Strong. So you're right. There's no argument for me with having them at number one. This is a complete football team and maybe the best they've had in probably decades.
That's what I'm really looking forward to seeing, because all of these teams have to play each other, and we're going to find out on the field whether or not we don't have to worry about people voting. It's going to be settled. I was upset last year when or in the spring when Sam Houston was not the number one team, and then Sam Houston went out there and ran the table. You know what? They said, hey, we'll prove it. So 4 games into the season, great conversation with you. I appreciate your time again. Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Tell them where they can find all your information at.
Footballgameplan.com, youtube.com/footballgameplan, and always hit that subscribe and follow button on social media. Football Game Plan on Instagram, at FBallGamePlan on Twitter.
Absolutely. And make sure that you catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, on my Talk Spicy podcast. If you don't catch it live, streaming everywhere, then make sure that you go to Spotify and catch it on Spotify. If you just want to listen, make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube channel. We really do appreciate it. We're a few subscribers away from 2,000. Let's make sure that we get there. FCS, I told you I'd be coming back with some fire content. Look for more of this. Until next time, I'm Coach Gene Clemens. Y'all have a good one.